Hola, buenos días. ¿Qué tal? Me llamo Rick. How are we all? Are we all doing okay? You're still with us and you managed to keep along. The response from the beginner Spanish, simple Spanish for beginners, has just been, it's been incredible really. And as I said, it's more of a passion of mine rather than actually something to try and push out there. It's for genuine for people who want to have a crack at it and want to have a go. It follows its own structure, not like the structure you'll get from some other Spanish teachers. We've not even looked at the alphabet or days of the week at the moment, even though we will come to those further down the line. What we've done is really managed to, I call it utilize the language, but literally get the conversation going and getting it started. So we've got your get out of jail free cards that we did in the last lesson. Today what we're going to do is I'm going to try and explain a little bit more about the whole story of a verb, an infinitive of a verb, and a conjugation. Now you see what happens now when I say the infinitive of a verb and you see the hands, that becomes because it's a headline verb, and then we talk about the conjugation. I completely go straight into this position, which is I, you, he, she and it, we, yous and they. And you see that now starts to make sense a little bit more. We've used the most simple verb on the AR verbs, and that was the verb hablar, and that's the verb to speak. And then we've talked about the endings that will get put on there. Now then, if we're going to conjugate hablar, we'll just do it one more time. I speak is the first one. That would become hablo. You speak would be hablas. He, she or it speaks would be habla. We speak would be hablamos. You's plural speak would be habláis. And they speak would then be hablan. So it would look a little bit like hablo, hablas, habla. Hablamos, habláis, hablan. And it is a B, but it's a very soft B that goes in there. 90% of AR verbs will follow this rule. So if we take a different verb, for instance, and we put a different headline verb at the top, and the verb llamar, which is the verb to name or to call, then that becomes llamó, llamas, llama, llamamos, llamáis, llaman. So it follows the same rule. Let's try a different one, another AR verb, one we've not heard of before. A little bit of a tougher one to say because it's got the letter G in, which makes it the ch sound, and the verb is called trabajar. So your headline verb, the infinitive, is trabajar. Now, that follows the same rules, the same conjugations as we go down. Trabajar actually means to work. So I work, trabajó. You work, trabajas. He, she or it works, trabaja. We work, trabajamos. Yous work, trabajáis. And they work, trabajan. Bit of a tough one. Trabajó, trabajas, trabaja. Trabajamos, trabajáis, trabajan. But it's following the same path that we did with hablar, llamar, trabajar. Pick another one. Pagar, to pay. It's an AR verb. So now, the infinitive is pagar. The conjugation, pagó, pagas, paga. Pagamos, pagáis, pagan. I pay, you pay, he, she or it pays. We pay, yous pay, they pay. And that's how it comes down. A final one for today on an AR, comprar. Comprar, that means to buy. Again, it's an AR verb, so that would become compró, compras, compra, compramos, compráis, compran. There's your AR verbs. One thing to learn in Spanish is there are actually 5 different types of verbs in the Spanish language. Now we've just literally looked at the first one, and the first one is what's called an AR verb. The next 2 fall kind of in that sort of role as an AR verb. They follow along the lines of it. They are verbs that end in ER and verbs that end in IR. So the first 3 of 5 is AR, ER and IR. The one after that, the next one, becomes a little bit tougher. That becomes what's called an irregular verb. Now when you think of the word irregular in English, it's slightly different from the normal. It's a bit irregular. That's the easiest way to think about it. And some verbs fall into that bracket as well. And then the final one is what we have, I call them radical changing verbs. Now a radical changing verb is radically different to the way the infinitive starts. But we're going to get there later on. We've actually come across a couple of these already without even realising it. We'll get to there later on. But to get to them, you have to get these 3 down first of all. So we've done the AR. We'll now move on to the ER verb, a verb that ends in ER. That's very simple. First of all, we need to get the infinitive, we need to get the headline verb, and the headline verb we'll use, my go-to verb, is actually a verb called comer. Now comer actually means to eat. So I eat, we put it into the conjugation. We have three different styles of conjugation compared to the AR verbs. We actually have now the endings going to go O, S, E, emos, eis, en. Now that there really, when you put that next to the AR verbs, you can see the reason why it changes, because O, as, a, amos, eis, an, O, S, E, emos, eis, en, because it's an ER verb, so that's the reason why it works. So if we now get the infinitive of comer, and we put it into the conjugation, I eat would be como. You eat, comes. He, she, or it eats, come. We eat, comemos. Yous eat, coméis. And they eat, comen. We eat pizza. Comemos pizza. I eat paella. Como paella. So you see, in essence, we're creating a little bit of a grid with the ARs and the ERs. Are you still with us? Are you still with us? This is why you need a pen and a piece of paper to write these ones down, just to remember. Try and write the grid. Try it out as a grid. So if you write down, in the first column, I, you, he, she, it, all on the same line. We, yous, and they. And then your first heading across that side should be the AR. And the ending will be O, as, a, amos, eis, an. And then the next one should be ER. And that'll be O, S, E, emos, eis, en. Now, as mentioned before, this is really the crossover now. This is when people go, right, I really want to look at this language and I really want to try and get the language down. Not just a couple of catchphrases and a couple of words and phrases. I'd really like to actually learn and understand how the language structure is put together. So we're talking about the verbs, we're talking about AR verbs and ER verbs. 90% of these verbs will end this way, okay? So all you got to do sometimes, it's about teaching yourself Spanish. So if I came across comprar, I'd go, that's an AR verb. Is it a regular AR verb? Yes, so therefore it must be compro, compras, comprar, compramos, compráis, compran. Okay, we've done that with ER verb. We use the go-to verb was comer, which is to eat. We're now going to go with an IR verb. Now an IR verb, first of all we need the infinitive, and we'll use one called abrir. Now abrir means to open. Now the endings of the IR verbs are a little bit in relation to the ER verbs as well. They go on their own direction at the end, but at the beginning they actually follow the path of how an ER verb should end. So if with comer we started como, comes, comer, so the first three in abrir would follow the same endings, O, S, E. So that would then become, I open would be abro. You open would be abres. He, she, or it opens would be abre. It changes on conjugation 4 and 5. It follows its IR path, because we open would then be abrimos. Yous open would be abris. And then it goes back to following an ER path of they open would be abren. Abro, abres, abre, abrimos, abris, abren. So let's finish this lesson off. This depends now on how fluent people would like to speak the language. I've given you now the table of the conjugations, of the AR verb, the ER verb and the IR verb, and we've put the endings in all the way down. You can do it in two different ways, and this is where the fluency comes. If this sounds like a little bit like I'm showing off, it's not. This takes practice and practice and practice when I was out walking the dog, and just learning them as I go along. The endings, it gives you 18 endings of the conjugations, because it's 6 conjugations, but 3 times over, AR, ER and IR. And you've got 6 of each in each one. Now, you can either learn the endings on their own, and then put them together when every verb you get to, or you can learn a headline verb, which is an easy go-to verb, which normally for me would be hablar, comer, abrir, and then throw the conjugations down there. And this is then how it sounds. So we get the 6 every single time. We know on an AR verb ending, we go O, as, a, amos, eis, an. O as a, amos eis an. On an ER verb, O-S-E, emos eis en. O-S-E, emos eis en. And then you get the IR verb, O-S-E, imos is en. O-S-E, imos is en. If you learn it that way, that's fantastic. However, if some people struggle with that, what they'll do is they'll then say, well, we'll use the go-to verb, it's easier to do. So an AR verb will become hablar, and that would then be hablo, hablas, habla, hablamos, habláis, hablan. Comer is the ER verb. Como, comes, come, comemos, coméis, comen. Abrir is the IR verb. Abro, abres, abre, abrimos, abrís, abren. Now I know it's a mouthful, but don't get me wrong, I'm 2 years down the line on this, but you've got to start from it with somewhere, but now at least you understand why the endings are there. So when you're walking around, pick a one first of all, pick the AR first of all, then jump to the ER, then go to the IR. Because once you've got the grid, the idea then is to be able to jump around the grid to get the different words every time. I speak, he eats, we open. And if you can do that, that's when you actually start getting the language coming together. Okay? Good luck with it. Thank you very much. Leave the comments below how you're getting on. This is a tough one, okay? This is a tough. If you've got this far, you're doing fantastic. You really are. Give yourselves a pat on the back. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. It's nice to see. And as I said, it's more of a passion than anything else. And we'll see you on the next one. All right? Cheers, guys. Adios.